Hello everybody, Gashbad here, and as part of my effort to start playing some different games, I am finally going to break out the old Doctor Who Exterminate game that I've had sitting around for a long time, and to go with that I am going to make a new set of terrain to go with it. As you can see here, we've got some terrain that came in the box. Obviously I'm not going to use that, but really it's not as bad as I thought. You got a two-sided battle mat, again, which I'm not going to use. And you've got these pieces of punch-out terrain. You've got two sides for those two. I'm just flipping them over to the other side so we can see them more clearly. Anyway, my initial concern was that there was not going to be enough terrain here to make a decent battle. But actually, when I spread it around in the center of the table, it's not that bad. We've got a 3 foot by 3 foot play area. And so what I'm going to be doing is I'm just going to be using a gray felt for the table as always. But the scatter terrain, the obstacles, the walls, that kind of thing, I'm going to replace these because I don't really care for two-dimensional terrain. I like three-dimensional terrain on my miniatures games, but I don't really need as much as I thought. So I'm just going to replace these pieces, maybe add a couple more, and that should be good. I've already got resin TARDIS from Warlord Games, so we don't need this anymore, so that'll be fine. As far as what kind of table I want to make, the Doctor Who universe is vast, and you can choose any number of things, and they'd be great, but if you had to start one place, if you had to choose one thing, I think you really got to go with a quarry. An old gravel quarry that, especially the classic series, loved to film to replace a whole bunch of things, alien worlds, battlefields, that kind of thing. Sometimes they'll even go crazy and have the quarry actually represent a quarry, like in Hand of Fear and Ambassadors of Death. So I've got some pieces that'll fit just fine. I'm going to go with the dark gray quarry. They actually filmed in a number of them, and you could pretty much go with whatever, but I've already got some terrain pieces painted in a dark gray, so I'm going to start with those. And then the first thing that I want to do is make gravel piles. So I'm going to start with some of the larger pieces, like something about this size, something about this size. I'm going to turn into gravel piles. And first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to make a base for them. Again, this is a scrap piece of hardboard I've had for a long time. Just going to trace a rough circular or bean shape about the size of some of these pieces. Then I'm going to go outside, I'm going to cut it up with the jigsaw and then bevel down the edges, make a smoother gradient with the sandpaper bit of the Dremel tool. I will check back in after I've done that. Welcome back. As you can see, I've got my bases cut out and beveled, and so now I've grabbed a couple of chunks of XPS foam, extruded polystyrene to pink or blue insulation foam, just some offcuts that I've had lying around, and I'm going to cut some roughly conical shapes to go on here. So, and I could just use a bread knife or a steak knife or something like that, but in this case I've actually broken out the hot wire cutter. And so I'm just going to go around and trim down these sections until I get a shape that I like. So here we have our two gravel pile shapes. As you can see, I didn't spend too long trying to make them perfect. They're going to get covered up with a bunch of material. You can see I got a big gouge taken out of this when I cut it out the first time. Yeah, I did end up having to use a knife for some of the sections in here. You can see I made sort of a double pile like that. So the next step that I'm going to do is I'm going to go outside and I'm going to find some small rocks and I'm going to place those, and those are going to be like the larger rocks that are going to go around the edge like this. I may have to cut out some sections of the bottom part of these shapes in order to fit them in, but we'll see what I end up with. Then I'm going to glue them all down to the base. And then I'm going to start in with some spackle and some sand. I'm just going to fill in some of the areas with the spackle that I need to, and then I'm going to coat the lower part with glue, just regular white glue, and then I'm going to put on some coarser stones that I picked up a long time ago from a model railroad place. Then I'm going to cover the top areas, the rest of the space, with glue, and then cover that with just regular playground sand. So here we have the gravel piles all set up and ready to be painted. You could probably just use these as they are, but I want mine to match the game board a little bit. And so I'm just going to go out and I'm going to hit them with the normal black spray paint. I don't have to use the good model spray paint for this. And then I'm going to paint them like I paint all my rocks. I'm going to do a base coat of charcoal, thin down some black paint, hit them with a wash, then go with the charcoal, add it to rain gray, go up to rain gray, then start adding in drizzle gray. Drizzle gray will be the final highlight. So let's see how they look when they're painted. Oh, and when the grays are all done, I'm going to do a little spot wash on some of it with some burnt umber, add some brown in there just for a little extra realism. Yeah, I'm going to go out and get that started, and we'll see what they look like when they're all done. I figured I'd start on the next terrain project. In a bunch of the old Doctor Who episodes in a quarry, they have these weird clusters of skinny, leafless, man-sized trees that they'll sometimes tromp through. I think you can see them in episodes like The Deadly Assassin, The Mutants, Genesis of the Daleks, stuff like that. So I went outside and I went looking around for twigs that might fit the bill, might look like little dead trees. And I found these. I took these off the ends of a Japanese maple. Now normally I don't like using things for actually what they are. You know, I'd rather use actual model trees. Sometimes I sculpt my own rocks out of XPS foam, that kind of thing. But the thing is, these are free. And plus they're alien trees, so if they look a little weird, that's fine. So I'm going to use these. What I'm going to do next is I'm just going to take a glob of hot glue. I'm going to set these in to this base that I made, exactly the same way as I made the other bases. And yeah. So here's how that turned out. As before, I'm going to add a little spackle, gravel, and sand to have it match the bases of the rest of my terrain pieces, and also to disguise the big blobs of hot glue. So as you can see, I've undercoated the trees in black with just the basic black spray paint, and I've painted the rocks like I have done with all the rest of the rocks. So now I went and carefully touched up the trees with more black, and I'm going to do a series of very careful highlights. These are tiny dry branches, and they are very brittle and easy to break, so I'm going to be really careful. So it's just going to be a series of browns. I'm going to start with a dry brush of burnt umber mixed with black. Then I'm going to go on to straight burnt umber, then brown iron oxide, spice brown, and then finally a final dry brush of spice brown mixed with trail tan. And I'm going to be careful not to break these while I do that. Then they get sealed like the rest of the train pieces, and I'm going to call that done. So the next terrain project I'm going to make are going to be these clusters of large rocks and boulders that you sometimes see the characters picking their way over. As you can see, I've already set up a couple of those. So I'm just going to make a base like I always do out of hardboard. And then I'm going to form some of these larger rocks out of XPS foam, plus add a couple regular rocks there. Now I actually did a whole video on how I make the large rocks. I did a thing on stalactites and runestones. But in case you missed it, what I do is I just take a hot wire cutter, and if you're short on time, you don't even really need to do that. You can just use, just a steak knife or a bread knife or something like that. But I just go through and make a little one for you guys right here. There's a flat edge, that'll be the bottom. And then I just roughly cut this to the general shape that I want. The hot wire cutter will make very smooth cuts, which is not really what you want for a rock. So as soon as I get something relatively close, I'm going to go in with the knife. And I'm just going to start chipping away. So remember, since this is a subtractive art, you want to start bigger than you want the final project to be and work down. So I'm just going to chip away until I get a more organic shape. Try and get rid of all the smooth sides. There you go, something like that. And then once you've got something close to what you want, Then you go in with something. Some people use a balled up piece of tin foil. I just use regular rocks and I add just a little texture, smash down some of the sharper edges. And then we just hot glue the fake rocks and the real rocks onto the base, add the spackle and the sand, and then we are done. So here's the next batch of terrain all painted up, and I am really looking forward to doing something other than dry brushing gray. One thing I may have forgotten to mention is for the bits that are just XPS foam, you're going to want to cover those with something, glue, Mod Podge. I just use regular paint. Anyway, cover all the surface of the foam before you hit it with your undercoat of your spray black. Because otherwise the spray paint will dissolve the foam. So regular paint just works fine with me. Anyway, this is all set, so of course I'm going to seal it. I'm going to use this stuff right here because it's cheap, and then I think that's going to be it. All the terrain's going to be done. So all the terrain is set up, but before we take a look at everything all put together, I thought we'd go back to the original Doctor Who Exterminate table just to compare. And so here you have the mat with the correct terrain side of the individual scatter pieces. And again, I thought that there was no way you could really use this. I thought there was going to be too little terrain for a good game. And I'm just not a believer in mats or 2D terrain just in general. But actually, this isn't bad. It's not a bad collection of terrain. I think you could easily have a battle with this stuff just out of the box. Just cluster it all in the center, and I think you're good to go. Again, I think these pieces are a little hard to see. On the table, they kind of blend in with the rest of the mat. It's not really much of a problem in person. And myself, personally, if I was doing a Doctor Who mat, I wouldn't have chosen the brownish matte color. I would have gone with more of a traditional gray quarry. This looks almost more like an Old West table in a lot of ways. But maybe they had something particular in mind, a particular reference from a certain episode or something like that. I will say that two-dimensional TARDIS, it's not great, but let's clear this away and take a look at the table that I constructed. Here we have the new board all set up with our new terrain pieces, including models for the game and everything like that. So a 3-foot by 3-foot Doctor Who Exterminate game board done in about a week for about $0, all made from just scraps I had lying around. Now, if you wanted to do something like this, you may have to buy, what did I use? Hardboard, some XPS foam, spackle, glue, paint. Otherwise, it's twigs and rocks from the backyard, 2 different kinds of sand. That's about it. Even if you had to buy this stuff, it would be pretty cheap. Let's go in and just take a look right here. What do we have? We have about 12 terrain pieces, most of which you saw me make, but none of them really deviated that far from each other. So you did see me make these gravel piles. I did make one more here, only the difference was that I chopped it in half. I just carved away this section and piled some rocks on the other side, made a little hillside. I also took this hill that I made a long time ago. It's just 2 layers of XPS foam glued together and then carved out to make kind of a rocky cliff. That's from a Warhammer Fantasy table, but I think it works pretty well on this, so I just added it to the pile. And here we have the 5th Doctor and the resin TARDIS from Warlord Games, so I can use that now. We're moving around. We have our Cybermen set up. I'm still using the Vortex node markers. It would be nice for me to replace those with an appropriate terrain piece, but that does bring me to the next thing. So this is just kind of a basic board. It'll work, it'll function for what we need it to, but if we want to get more elaborate, we can start adding elements to make this board a little bit more our own. For example, the first piece I'm going to do is this little lift that you saw briefly in Genesis of the Daleks, but we can make this a Skaro board, we can make this a colony and space board, we can make this a cave system, we can use it for other game systems. Warhammer Fantasy, Perilous Tales, Rangers of Shadow Deep. In fact, for the next scenario in Rangers of Shadow Deep, I'm going to have to make a bunch of these rocks to put on one side of the table for the bridge guard. So it's kind of nice that I started up with some of these. You know, even a construction site for, say, the Batman miniature game, it might be nice to have these gravel piles around. Anyway, that's the table. Let me know if you have any questions, comments, concerns, that sort of thing. And otherwise, I will see you on the next one.